Hey guys, so it's been a while since I popped in. I figured I've been doing talking hands for the last few videos and that gets a little boring. So I figured I would switch things up in Nikki and Mallory fashion, the way I like to do things. A lot has changed since my last few videos. I have a bigger designer space. I'm officially bald head. Life is still great and we're still making these bags. So speaking of these bags, the piece that we're gonna make today is a designer-inspired camera pouch. I say designer-inspired meaning that another bigger designer has made this bag. I'm an advocate for not mimicking other people's designs. This was more like a learning experience for me. I've never made a bag of this style, this size, this shape. I'm constantly putting myself to the test. And this was one of those test pieces. So I'm going to show you the process of how I made it, and hopefully you get the opportunity to make it yourself. I guess you can cue the talking hands at this point. Yeah, so we're going to go back to the talking hands at this point, but it was nice to talk to you guys. All right, peace. Before we dive into making our bag, of course, I have to create the pattern piece, which I am making from scratch. I like to make sure everything is accurate and as even as possible before I start cutting the pieces out and applying them to my leather. I do make tweaks along the way, but I try to make sure everything is good to go before I even attempt to cut anything. The leather that I'll be using today is the Hermann Oak Veg Tan panel in a 2 to 3 ounce and a 4 to 5 ounce. This is my first time working with this leather, and honestly, when I opened up the package, the texture, the quality of it is perfect. It has a really soft hand to it, which I love when it comes to veg tan, and it has a really nice finish to it. I'm using a thicker ounce weight for the exterior of the bag, and the smaller pieces, as you can see here, will be in the 2 to 3 ounce. So in addition to our cut leather pieces, and because I'm extra and I like to experiment when it comes to leather and try new things, for this project we will also need stencils, leather stencils. I'm using the 1-inch size stencils, 24 millimeters. We will also be using a zipper for this project. Some Angelus acrylic paint. I'm going with a white. I'm not sure if I'll be doing neutral white or a flat white just yet. I'll figure that out when the time comes. And then of course we will need some paintbrushes. So this bag has a lot of different pieces to it. I've never made this shape and or size before. So when it came to building out the bag, it was a little challenging for me to figure out which portion of the bag I wanted to build out first. I decided to go with the bottom portion, and of course I gave myself some stitch grooves so that I can figure out how to stitch the bottom gusset onto half of the front panel, because of course in working with gussets it gets a little tricky, so you want to make sure that everything is even, especially when it's in this circular shape that it is. So of course once I figured that out, then I was able to punch out my chisel holes. It did require a little bit of math, which is not fun for me, but I figured it out, and yeah, we're just gonna build it out starting from the bottom portion of the gusset first. Now that all my pieces are prepped, I can move on to the zipper. So right here, I'm just gonna cut my zipper in half. It's pretty long, so I'm just gonna apply double-sided tape to the zipper panels and then apply those panels to the zipper and stitch those in place. I will say this is where it started to get a little crazy because I really had to make sure this thing was going to be even. If this portion is not evenly stitched together, then it messes up the entire bag. So I really had to be tedious and thorough with this process. So when it comes to punching the holes for the zipper gusset, it gets a little tricky because you have to match up everything accordingly to make sure that once your entire piece is completely stitched all the way around, that it is even, so that when you stitch this part on, there's no gaps. So it is a little tricky. There's a science to it. When I made the pattern piece, I wanted the zipper gusset to get stitched about an inch going in. So that's pretty much where my measurements come from to make sure everything evens out. If I start my stitch line at an inch in, which is about 5 chisel holes, all the holes from here to the other end even out for this particular area. Again, there's a science to it. You just have to make sure that if you are creating a pattern piece from scratch, that you are using basic math to make sure everything evens up properly. The last thing that I'm going to do before I have to stitch everything together is stencil out my letters so that I can paint and have everything dried before I assemble the bag. So I'm going to take my stencil letters and trace everything out. So this is pretty much how it'll look on my bag. Of course, it's not spelled correctly because you have to reuse certain letters. I'm just gonna make sure everything is even and then trace out my letters using an awl. So I finally finished stenciling out my letters onto the leather. It's very, very light. You can't see it really, or maybe you can. But instead of starting directly on this piece, this is my first time painting letters. I've painted other things onto leather before. So I'm gonna start out with this little sample piece that I have stenciled a letter on. I actually ended up mixing both the neutral and the flat white to give it a good balance, because the flat white has, or the neutral has, like a weird undertone. It's like an off-white. So just to balance this flat white out and to give it a looser texture, I mixed those two together, put it in my little bowl, and I have my paintbrush. I'm gonna start off doing this little section just to test out how it's gonna look, and if it looks crazy, I'm not doing it at all. Because I am quite the artist, it's coming out great. I decided to use a white pencil just to kind of outline everything, just to see if that would make the painting process easier. It really didn't, but I tried it anyway just to make sure I was eliminating all steps before I started painting the main piece. Okay, as you can see, it's like, I don't know, 10 minutes later, I'm making my way through. I stopped outlining the edges with my pencil and just started going straight in with my paint. So yeah, once I found a rhythm, everything just started coming together. I'll do one coat, let this dry, and then do a top coat. And then once that dries, I can stitch everything together. So halfway through the design process, I decided that I wanted to add a little embossing and kind of break up the monotony of the white. I think the embossing gives it a good contrast. And of course, I needed to add some extra wording in there just to make this bag official. And right here, I'm just stitching up the bag. Once I figured out all my measurements were accurate, I just decided to go in and start stitching the bag to completion. So finally finished stitching everything together, my zipper, the gusset, and the front part of the bag. I was gonna do a saddle stitch, but then I decided to do one stitch going around because then I got real creative, and I'm going to add this canvas trimming around the edges, which means I'll have to add another stitch line to keep it in place, which will essentially be my saddle stitch for all the saddle stitch heads out there. Before I attach the back panel on, I'm going to add in my side tabs for the straps, but I'm thinking of a different style idea for that as well. I might just go ahead and do this double layer look with the leather and the canvas, or whatever material this is. But yeah, I'll figure that out. We're almost done. And as you can see, if I take off this lens and if I remove these straps, but even still, our camera fits perfectly in there. Might even need to just tuck the straps, and whatever lenses, extra lenses you have, would go on the side and or in any spaces that the bag has available. And if you don't need to take any extra lenses, you can also put another camera here, which I have a smaller camera that I'm shooting on, which would fit here perfectly. So yeah, that's the process of our bag. I'm gonna go ahead and finish everything up. To keep my trim in place, I applied some leather cement, and I actually switched up my stitch method. Instead of using a regular tiger thread, I decided to go with a heavy duty polyester thread and using a thinner needle. It would be the same thread and needle that I would use in making clothes or when I work with upholstery. I wanted the thread to be really discreet and look seamless, so that was the only way to achieve that method. So I switched all of that around, and you can't even tell that there's a thread in there, which is perfect. That is the exact look that I was envisioning, and it came out really good. For the strap, I used the same technique, applied some leather cement, and then took that over to my industrial machine and did a base stitch to keep the top trim in place, and I love the way it came out. This is my designer inspired bag. Cannot wait to put my cameras in and go out for the summertime and take some pictures. I might actually add some cushion in the interior to protect the cameras a little bit, but we'll do that later. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll catch you on the next project. Peace.